If we move our mouse over the Action button, we can see a drop-down menu that lists all of the actions available for this workflow at this point on its life cycle. So the exact options you see on this menu depend on the configuration options set by your administrator and the life cycle of the workflow. The Progress action is what we use to move a workflow into the next state. When we select Progress from the Action menu, we see the Progress action window. The exact options that you see in this window will depend on the configuration options that have been set by your administrator. The first thing that may be different is the Progress menu label itself. The administrator may change this label to better reflect what moving to the next state actually means. The next thing that may be different in your system to what you see here is the To State field. This only shows if your administrator has configured the current state to allow you to progress the workflow into more than just one state. The Assign To fields may or may not be editable depending on the workflow configuration. If they're editable, you can choose who should be assigned the workflow when it reaches the next state. Workflows can be assigned to roles, groups, individuals, or contractors. Let's choose individuals from the first drop-down because I know the person that needs to work on this job. Now I need to enter their name into the second field. This field can be configured in two different ways, so you will either see a drop-down arrow or a couple of dots. If the arrow is here, I can just pick the person I want from the drop-down list. If you have a lot of people in your list, it may be quicker to search for the person by starting to type some of their surname. Once there is only one match in the search results, their name is completed for me. Now all I need to do is to hit enter to select it. You can tell it's selected because the name goes black and becomes underlined. The last field I need to fill in is the Details field. Anything I fill in here is added to the action log or the history of the workflow and can be included in notification emails to the new action officer. Now that all of the fields are filled in, I can either click Save and stay on the screen, or I can click Save and Close to close the screen. Before we click Save, note the current state over here on the left in black. Your workflow has now been moved into the next state. The Query action is the opposite of Progress. You use the Query action when you want to move the workflow back into a previous state. All of the fields shown are fairly similar to the Progress fields, except the only states listed are ones the workflow has previously been through. Again, the exact fields that show on your query screen and the way they work will depend on how your administrator has configured the query options for that state on that workflow type. So to recap, Progress moves us forward through the workflow state and Query moves us backwards. You can set a new action officer or group by filling in the Assign To field. Sometimes you need to change who a workflow is assigned to, but don't want to change the current workflow state. This is when you use the Assign action. It's very similar to Progress and Query, but there is no option to change the state. Again, typing in some instructions for the new action officer in the Details field will record these in the action log and add them to any notification emails. The Email action is used when you want to email someone and record that in the workflow action log. I can add recipients to the email by typing their surnames into the search field and then clicking on the Add Recipient button when the correct person is shown. I can also add roles and groups as recipients, which will email all members of these groups. If the email needs to go to an email address that is not attached to a contact, you can manually enter it by selecting Other. Your administrator can configure email templates which can pull data off the workflow screen, populate the subject line and email body for you. You can also attach any files that are attached to this workflow to the email by going to the Attachments tab. Clicking on the Send Email button at the bottom of the screen sends the email and returns you to the workflow screen. You will now see the email listed in the action log of the workflow. The Add Note option is useful when you want to add something to the action log but don't want to change the workflow state or who the workflow is assigned to. This one's very easy. Just add the details of the note to the Details field and click Save or Save and Close. The internal tick box on this screen is used when you don't want users set up as contractors to see the notes. Progress, Query, Assign, Email and Add Note are the main actions used with workflows. There are a few more which I'll briefly explain. Again, these options will only show on your menu if your administrator has turned them on for that state and that workflow. The Pause action is a way to effectively park the workflow. Any SLA or metric time calculations stop and the workflow shows in any list as being paused. A different color is also used on the State side panel when a workflow is paused. The Cancel action flags the workflow as cancelled and sets its status to inactive. At the bottom of the Action menu is the Tools menu. The options shown here will depend on the configuration options chosen by your administrator. They include an SLA report and the Audit History report. The Audit History report gives you the full details on who has changed what and when. The last item in the Action menu is the URL option. This displays a pop-up window with a link to the screen. This is useful if you want to email someone a link to the screen. The last point about the Action menu is that although you can progress a workflow when you're just viewing it, any required fields will have to be filled in before you can progress it. And you will need to edit the workflow using the edit icon to complete this.